Well, hi everybody. Today I'm back and I've invited back Lisa Weiner for a second time with us. And she is a nurse practitioner, a faculty member at the Neufeld Institute, a level two IFS trained practitioner, as well as a parent consultant. Welcome back, Lisa.
Thanks, Maria. Good to
Yeah,
see you always. Yeah.
thanks. I'm so glad you're here because I invited you back specifically to talk about development and maturity. So, Lisa, tell me what's one thing you would love for the world to know about this?
So, so when we talk, we're going to talk about how certain, like, capacities are not available to kids until generally certain ages. Just like we wouldn't ask, a 6-month-old to walk, we can't ask, things of kids earlier than that is even available to them in their development. But so I think what I want the world to know is like the big but, the big caveat is that we're going to talk about some ages, but that does not mean that that applies to every child. Just like, to use the walking analogy, just like a child who had like issues with their feet or their legs, we're not going to apply the same standard to them as a child who didn't. Kids have all different sorts of things going on. And just because for the, say, majority of kids, this is the average age when this becomes available, it does not mean that there aren't defenses in place that don't allow access to this capacity. Basically, why I'm saying that is because I never want anything I say about like ages and capacities to end up being used against a child or a teenager who is that age, who, for whatever reason, for a very good reason, it all makes sense, is not accessing that or displaying that. I would never want it to be like, you're 12, so you should be able to do this. It's like that's never a helpful approach.
Yeah.
So,
I
yeah.
love that. I love that because it's also like, the reason I invited you back is because I like to talk about just what are the general capacities that become available. And I love
Mm-hmm.
what you said, like I think you said it's never wrong. Like everything has a purpose that, if there's a defense up, we'll look at that for sure. And being so mindful just of the individual and the loving attachment that needs to be there either way. And I think, I know you're a parent consultant. I work a lot with parents, and it's like sometimes I feel like we're expecting things, like you're saying, we're expecting the 6-month-old to walk emotionally and cognitively and morally and psychologically. And, I remember when my own son, he didn't walk till he was 14 months. And I remember at his 12 months being like, oh no, oh no. So we don't want to get in that trap for sure. But, just as far as like the general capacities that can become available to a child. And tell me, what's one thing about, the preschooler, for example, because I've done some studying of Neufeld with you. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the preschooler, usually I was going to say like doesn't have a lot of the capacities that often parents and teachers are hoping they will have.
Yeah.
Like the ability to hold two thoughts, two feelings, two things at once in the brain is a function that happens in the prefrontal cortex. And that capacity is not available until at least 5 years old. And that's if everything's going right in this kid's life. Attachments are going right, sensitivity isn't too much, in a best case scenario, which is usually just not the case, but like theoretically, somewhere between 5 to 7. If you have sensitivities, if you have, then it will be like 7 to 9. If you have, hard life experiences, attachment issues, alpha issues, some people can't ever hold two things at once. So like, it's not a given, but it is available to be had if everything else is aligning right, like between 5 and 9. And what that capacity will look like is so many things that we're asking of kids, like to think of someone else, at the same time that they're being driven by what they want, to hold someone else's point of view in mind, which we can ask of really young kids who are not able to do that. And if someone is continually being asked or scolded or something for not doing something that they were actually unable to do. That can be really painful. It can create a lot of defenses, which can then actually block the availability of that capacity when it comes online.
Even further, pushing it even
Yeah.
further out. I know,
Yeah.
because I think, it's such an interesting age, the preschooler age, and that's what's perfect. I have a play therapy practice. This is a play therapy room because children that age it's all external. There's really no inner dialogue going on. So a kid will come in here and just boom, grab the soldiers, grab the castle. It's like this stuff needs to be played out, projected.
Yes.
And
Yes.
especially if he's like 5 or 6, highly sensitive, like we know these things. And then later on, the child will be able to sort of reflect a little more or have a little bit more of what we hope for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Impulse control comes with, I want to hit my brother, but my parents don't want me to hit my brother. Well, there's a struggle that leads to like a pause. And, it doesn't mean that they're always going to be able to do it either, but it's there. They're working it out. I want to hit this kid with the shovel in the sandbox, but my teacher doesn't like it when I do that. Before the age when the brain can even hold those two at once, it's like, I want to do this, I'm doing it, before there's not thinking about it.
Yeah.
There's not any struggle. There's not any on the other hand.
Yes.
So yeah, so that's one thing that I find can be really helpful for parents to understand, because they're really often asking for, expecting, getting frustrated with the fact that their child is not doing this thing that, when we talk about it, like sometimes I'm like, what if, someone kept getting mad at you because you couldn't fly? Like you literally can't,
Yeah.
like it's just, that's really painful.
Yeah.
And you can feel not understood and not seen, and is something wrong with me? Like, why is everyone expecting me to do this thing that I can't do?
That hurts to even hear about it.
Yeah.
It's like it's really like a painful process. And I wonder why. Sometimes I think, it's because we just have such high intellectual expectation for little ones. So I think that's such an important kind of distinction to draw, that we look for somewhere between 5 and 7 in best case scenarios, for there to be some of that. You'll hear that the kid will hit, but later he'll cry and feel sorry. Okay, so I remember Gordon Neufeld talking about, good, so both things are present, and one day they'll meet.
And one day they'll both be in the room at the same time, and so there's all sorts of ways, like, there's ways to work with that, to prime that, to make that more likely to happen when it's online. Yeah, and it's also not like, dial turns and they're going to do it every time.
Right. Yes.
We're looking for little clues. Oh, it's there. Okay, good. That can provide some relief. If I can tell the parent, if their kid says, I didn't mean to hit, my brother, and the parent can feel angry, like, well, they did, and whatever. And we can instead see that as, that's really good. They're starting to come in, there was some, like, I didn't want to, but I got away from myself, and awesome, and so it can really help parents be more helpful and more compassionate. Yes. And yeah.
So cool.
And stay connected with their kid through the process, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because we want to keep the attachment, right? Build and keep the attachment. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
And I'm so curious if there, about the next stage. And I like to look at it kind of like 8 to 12.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
So, yeah, like 8 to 12 is kind of sometimes like a kind of golden time, like that, like if that, integrative functioning, which is what we call the ability to have the mixed feelings, comes online, and it's before the adolescent storm hits. And so that time I don't really have any big like markers like this, but at the onset puberty of adolescence, like we were talking about before you started recording, there is, and again, whether or not that is available to the tween or teen depends on a lot of factors. So we're not going to say, we had our timer on, you had your birthday, now you're going to be able to do this. But it's the raw material for this to happen is now available, whereas it was not before in the child, is the ability to reflect on oneself, to see oneself, to imagine what an ideal would look like. So it's like this reflective ability and this speculative ability. The ability to, before that, child is just in their experience. It's just a me. And it turns into the ability to have like an eye, like a looking at oneself, seeing how there's a really good purpose for this, because adolescence is a time of sort of figuring out who you are and, who you are outside of your attachments. And in order to do that, you have to be able to see, who am I? Who am I? And then also the speculative, like the imagining, who would I want to be? Who do I admire? What's the ideal parent or teacher or 13-year-old? What are the values I admire? So it's this ability to imagine what could be and to see what is. And this is a side note, but usually there's a big gap between those two. Like, right?
Okay.
The ideal parent and then the parent they have, right? And so this is or the ideal teacher and the teacher they have, or the ideal kid and the kid they are. It can make for it's hard. And that can be why defenses come up.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to look at yourself and see the ways maybe you're falling short. So
yeah,
it takes a lot of tolerance of vulnerability to be able to realize this. But again, it's a thing that we ask of kids way before.
That's what I was going to say. I feel like that's what we're asking 2-year-olds to tell us why they did something.
Yeah, exactly, Maria.
And it's hard. It's hard because and we're using it sort of as a discipline vehicle. Like that 2-year-old needs to tell me why they did it. They need to, or 3 or 4, like that. And we're hopeful. I think when we do that, we're just hopeful that will give them some reflection capacity. But as you're saying, it's just a very long childhood. It doesn't even become a potential capacity till adolescence, like you're saying.
Yeah.
Adolescence is like, and it's wow, it's just when I think about that adolescent, the birth of the speculative, and I think you said introspective, reflective and
speculative. Yep.
That's like, wow, that seems so overwhelming.
It's so overwhelming.
Yeah. And tell me a little bit just like about vulnerability. You said like,
yeah. Well, I just want to just finish what you were just saying. Like, yes, so it can give us so much more compassion for how hard that time is. And it presents to us as parents, to teachers, to the world as very, difficult and clumsy and rude and abrasive and, chaotic. But when we can understand what's going on from the inside, understanding this age from the inside out, we can have so much more compassion for how hard it is to all of a sudden have a blinder taken off and being able to see yourself. And it makes good sense of why teenagers think, everyone's looking at, the blemish they have on their face, or, because to them, it's almost the first time they're looking in a mirror. And how can everyone else not be looking at this, And then we get angry at them for being so self-centered or, egotistical or whatever, but they're actually meant to be self-centered at this time so that they can discover who they are. And you can't do that without looking at yourself. And you're not going to look at yourself for the first time without becoming kind of preoccupied with it, because it's new and it's big and it can lead to a lot of insecurity and, whatever. So the role of vulnerability is certain, feelings and experiences are hard to tolerate, such as looking at yourself, reflecting on yourself, seeing where you fall short. And if it has not felt safe enough due to, attachment issues, environmental issues, or sensitivity, if vulnerability in general has felt overwhelming for a child, say a child got, say it's a boy, And say the boy, when he cried, was told, boys don't cry, or, cry baby, or something like that. Then the vulnerability of feeling sad and feeling futility and having tears, the brain is going to defend against that. It's going to be like, that doesn't work when we do that. That's not safe. That hurts. We're not going to feel that anymore. And this is not conscious. This is the brain doing what the brain does to take care of us and to help us to function in the world we live in. So that sadness, that, is just, that vulnerability is not going to be felt. And so then when the capacity becomes available to see oneself, that's not going to happen as robustly as a kid who could feel all the vulnerability and then can look at themselves and see some things that, don't feel that great, or feel a little embarrassing, or, just that aren't their best moments. They'll feel more breadth in their self-reflection. Whereas this hypothetical kid that we're talking about, who's told not to cry and then has defenses against it, might not be able to self-reflect and see the hard places, because that requires vulnerability. So then you might get like someone who presents, say, with like an overinflated self-esteem, like not thinking they do anything wrong, thinking everything's great, thinking, and then they might get scolded by a parent or a teacher, like, oh, you think you're so great, or, don't you see you messed up? They're unable to look at the places where they fall short.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason is really, really good, because it was not, it could be the same parent who was scolding them for crying now telling them, oh, you think you're so great, look at yourself, and without any awareness of the past.
Mm-hmm. The connection.
So, probably the one thing, if I went back to the first question, the one thing I'd want the world to know is it's really, really important for us, in whatever capacity we have with kids, to protect their vulnerability.
Okay. Yes.
Because that's going to help development unfold as it's meant to.
At all
We
the stages.
need to feel our vulnerability.
Yeah.
From 5 to 7 to have our mixed feelings, from at 12 to be able to self-reflect. We need, for every maturing capacity, vulnerability needs to be there for it to really do what it's meant to do.
Yes. And I think, as you're talking about the process of when we do shut down an emotion, and I'm thinking of the parallel process that when I have a parent in session, that they also shut down a certain emotion. They're usually functioning adults, but we can tell that there's like something that was shut down for them that they're not even able to see now, that their child is bringing in.
Yeah.
And so that kind of like a parallel process.
Absolutely. And so, like, if a dad was told, not to cry, I'm saying this because it can be really common in boys and men, cry baby, whatever. Then when his son is crying, he for very good reason, because it wasn't safe for him to cry, and he has a part in him, and this is bringing in the parts work, the IFS. There's a part in him that took on the role inside of him to keep him safe, of shutting down the tears, because of, then you would get teased. You would get teased by the big brother, or you would get, scolded by the parents. So a part of him, again, for really good reason, to take care of himself, was like the anti-crier part or whatever, and so that part can get activated by his kids crying, right? So then what was done to him, and he developed a way to deal with that. Now he's doing. And so that is where the IFS work can work really, really well in supporting parents, is if he can, first of all, become aware of that part in himself, befriend it, get to know its story, help it, get permission to go to the one who was crying, who it was protecting, be with that one, help that one. Then the whole dynamic can change in him and in how he responds to his hypothetical son crying.
Yeah.
He can come to his son with the same acceptance, love, compassion, calm that he can bring to the one inside himself that was crying.
Yeah, that's very
So,
sweet and
yeah,
reparative. It can be reparative.
totally reparative.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think what we give to others, like what I give in play sessions or what I encourage parents to give, we strengthen in ourselves. So even that process can kind of happen that way. Yes, and I think it's, when you have, I think that's why you can go to a professional, because you want that outside point of view. And before we started recording, I was telling you about, because sometimes things are so close. So I've just moved home. And so now it's like a lot of the stuff that it's just close because this is where I grew up. So things that are
Yeah.
close are close. So it's nice to have an
Yeah.
outside point of view. And a lot of these parents that come to us, the kind of parents that would come to us are willing to look. And I think they're beating themselves up because the expectations of the 2-year-old being able to self-reflect, they're there. I think parents that tend to come to us they want to raise conscientious, loving children. And when you have a preschooler who is insensitive to things outside themselves, or the beautiful adolescent, it's almost like, as you're describing the adolescent, it's almost like we want to cloister. It's almost like, feels like a religious thing. Like they need a minute. And
In a minute. Yeah.
that's the long childhood. Is like they need that space and opportunity to grow so that they can be, I think the things that we value in adults, they can grow into that. But I really wanted to bring you on to talk about just that, like what is going on where parents want to raise conscientious children, but are expecting their young children to have this reflective capacity. And when they don't, they feel, oh no, I'm
Yeah.
raising a self-centered child.
That's right. Yeah. It's for a good reason in them. I want to have a child who, who has a good life, who has these qualities, or it could be a part in them that feels judged, by their in-laws or their parents or the people around them in the grocery store when their kid's having a tantrum. So they want their kid to be different so that they don't have to experience something that feels really hard for them, or, all sorts of reasons. Or they had trouble with, angry outbursts. And so if they see it, an inkling of it in their 2-year-old, they panic. I don't want my kid to, have it hard like I did. And so I want to give them what I didn't have. And we put many, many adult expectations on young kids because people don't understand the process that development takes. It's a long, slow, messy road.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can get some outside perspective often that can provide like some psychoeducation, like this is what happens, this is what it looks like, some normalizing, like, oh, yeah, my kid did that too, and he's 17 and he's awesome.
Yes.
We futurize, the 3-year-old doing this is going to be that 20-year-old doing this. And that's really where an outside perspective who can hold the big picture, who understands the path of development, who understands that adult capacities are not meant to show up in kids. They unfold. And the first step is always the safe expression of what's inside. And that can look really messy. So if we're expecting something neat and sanitized and polite from a 2-year-old, from a 5-year-old, from a 7-year-old, we are going to not be seeing it, thinking something's wrong, responding in ways that are not helpful, and they actually impede the path of development. They get us further away. They almost create their own reality, right? They create what they're afraid of, because if we step back and we support it and we kept relationship as the bottom line, we stay in the lead, things are generally gonna, move towards maturity. But if we're shutting things down and punishing and using separation as discipline and shaming, then the unfolding moves further and further away. And then it occurs to parents that they're not doing it hard enough.
Yeah.
And they double down and triple down, and
yeah,
it gets to be kind of a mess sometimes.
Yeah. Yes. I think it's, the psychoeducation, the messiness.
The perspective. Like, we can provide a calm perspective. Like, yeah, I'll often say to parents, they'll come to me the first session and they just think, they have like the worst kid in the world, I'll say, I'm not worried by anything I hear.
Mhm.
I'm not worried about your kid. This is what I see,
Yes.
and just that can provide so much relief because they're so panicked.
Yes, yes, and yes, exactly. And that's, I think, one of the things. And as you're talking about this kind of having this guarding the vulnerability, I remember when reading Neufeld's material, it's like, yes, this is how we've always approached childhood. Because sometimes people can think, oh, this is like some new kind of parenting. It's not the way I was parented, but actually,
Yeah.
it is the
It's
more
too
like
loose. It's
tradition.
too, yeah, anything goes. It's not. Yeah.
No, yeah, and I think we used to hold, I think, just civilization, pre sort of modern times or whatever, really was, we viewed children that way, as children, as someone who has to grow. Maybe we didn't view adolescents as children. Maybe we, I like
Yeah.
saying to my
That was different.
adolescents, yeah, like you're not a kid anymore, but you're still here, and under my care. So I think that's an obstacle sometimes people face, like, well, that's not, how I was raised. But I think it is,
Mm-hmm.
just, I like to point out that it's like a more traditional way of looking, almost like ancestral, almost like an ancient way of looking at things, pre like 50, 60, 70 years ago, something like that.
Yeah. A more like village, a more, there were lots of structures in place that supported attachment.
Mm-hmm.
Gordon, like, we'll call it like a more intact culture where like extended family was a part of raising kids. And yeah, not
Yeah.
to say that everything was great and there were,
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
things that needed to change, but there was generally culturally more awareness of attachment and emotion. Like the ancient Greeks had, like, everyone would go and see the tragedy, the play, because they knew it's important to cry and it's
Mm-hmm.
important through play and expressive play. And then
Mm-hmm.
they would have a comedy because it's also important to be playful. And so, like, these things were just part of the culture, and everybody went, and everybody,
Mm-hmm.
where they would have big grief rituals or just things
Mm-hmm.
that held an awareness of certain truths.
Yeah, and maybe a little bit, and we'll wrap up, but maybe just can hold a little bit of that vulnerability. And I want to just, share this far and wide, because I want people to know, yeah, that's, there are some milestones to look for, even though we don't want to hold kids to it if there's other defenses, but that, yeah, just to help parents feel some relief, and other educators and therapists and helpers, like, yeah, there's time.
There's time. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for this exploration of the development and maturity. And yeah, yeah, thanks again.
Thanks, Maria. It's always fun to see you. Yeah.
Awesome. Same. Thanks.